28mm might be my favorite focal length, especially for documentary and street photography style work. The images feel like you're really there. The photographer didn't just observe it from a distance, they existed in the scene. Personally, 35mm is my most used as I find it easier to come away with something okay. And then I think 50mm and longer starts to feel like there's a separation between the photographer and the moment. However, a 28mm photograph has more of an impact on how it makes me feel, but it's just so much more difficult to execute. With that being said, as soon as I started shooting on the Leica M11P at the end of last year, I bought the 35mm summilux. But coming out of 2023 shooting on the Q2, which is a 28, a little part of me did miss that 28mm focal length. Well, fast forward a couple of weeks, Thypoch got in touch and sent me this, the Simera 28 f1.4. And it has actually been 2 months since I've owned this lens, so in this video I thought I would share my opinion. I think the best place to start when talking about this lens is the price, and in the UK this retails for £570, and in the Leica world, that's a bargain. In short, if I could just review this lens in the next 10 seconds, I would say something along the lines of, since Thypoch have sent me it, it hasn't left my camera bag. And I even went on a trip to Italy last month and this came with me and was used alongside my 35mm. So I'm going to be keeping this and I'm going to continue using it because I'm really impressed. Just briefly talking about image quality and sharpness, this lens easily rivals my 35mm summilux. And listen, I'm not one to get super detailed and analyze the science behind how this lens is built to give you a perfect explanation about how sharp it is, but I just like to let the photographs do the talking, and the photographs this is produced is just as good quality as the photographs that my 35 summilux has produced, and that lens is obviously way more expensive. On a much less technical note, I genuinely love how this lens renders photographs. The focus fall off looks great and the bokeh looks clean. And if I'm keeping things simple, no, I'm not entirely sure on the technical aspects of how this lens is built, but I am sure that it's taken some of my recent favorite photographs, and I think that kind of stuff matters more than anything else. Before we dive into some of the main features and some of the reasons I really like this lens, let's actually discuss some negatives because the lens has some. And these might not be deal breakers, but more personal preferences. And perhaps I'm just being really picky. I'd say for me, this lens is 97% perfect. And that's for 3 small niggles that are just holding it back slightly. It's a big boy. Okay, so I realize I might literally be asking for the impossible. This lens is f1.4, so that obviously has a role to play with the glass and the optics inside, but it isn't exactly small. It's ever so slightly larger than my 35mm summilux, which is already edging on the limits of preferred length, personally. And that's without the lens hood. Aesthetically, the lens hood is cool, but it does make the lens longer, so I've opted to shoot without the hood most of the time. If there was an option for an f2, perhaps an f2.8 version, and that made the lens a little bit smaller, that might be ideal. Although I'm saying that this lens is big, I actually don't mind the weight of it. And I think there's a fine balance of having it around my neck. It doesn't make my neck ache after a long day, but also there is some weight and substance and it feels tactile. So hopefully that makes sense. The size, not my favorite, but the weight, not an issue. This next feature might not be a deal breaker for many people, but personally, I'm not really a fan of it, and that is the focus infinity lock. Each time I'm focusing close to infinity and I don't want to go to infinity, it kind of slips into place and then it's a little bit more difficult to get out. So it's just not convenient. Again, it's not a deal breaker, but I don't like, it kind of takes over at infinity and I have to bring it back. So it's just a small thing. I think it's unnecessary because this is a manual focus lens and the focus is always going to be used, right? So why would you not let, I don't know, stop me from using the focus, which is what it does sometimes. So yeah, infinity focus lock, yeah, why? Hello, Editor Mike jumping in here for a second. As I was going through this video, I saw that Thypoch have just announced the E, Z, RF and X mount versions of this lens, but this time without the infinity lock. And future M mount versions of this lens will also not have the infinity lock. So I think that's pretty cool. They are clearly listening to the feedback, but also on these new versions of the lenses, the focus tab is slightly different as well. Instead of the little bolt on the current lens, which I'll talk more about in a second, they've changed it to a more of a finger tab. So pretty cool that they're making adjustments as they are improving these lenses. Let's get back to the video. And the third thing, which I'm not too keen on with this lens, is the silver outer ring on the front. It reminds me of those really silly Leica Q3 accessories, you know, the gold accessories, the bright and shiny things. I don't know why anyone would want to walk around with their camera looking like that. This is obviously way more low-key than a big gold thing on the front, but what's wrong with just a black finish? I don't want this silver thing shining in anyone's face when I'm doing street photography. And again, this is a tiny thing. This is like just a small design preference, but the rest of the lens is black. So why is the front of it not black as well? So yeah, just a personal design preference right there. Now let's talk about some of the features I do really like, and kicking things off with the thing that probably makes this lens stand out the most. And that's the depth of field focus distancing design. For zone focusing, this design preview is really useful. And that's not to say that the regular measuring distances on the lenses was a problem before. This isn't really an issue that needed fixing, but just this visual design is easy to see your distances and easy to check your zones. So yeah, it's a welcomed addition. Talking about build quality, which I think is excellent, and considering the price, that is surprising. Cheap in price, but luxury in build. But also one of the cool features on here is the switch, which lets you choose between clicky full stops or a totally smooth ring, depending on your preference. Personally, I prefer to have the clicks per stop, as I wouldn't want to accidentally knock the aperture when handling the camera. I did mention I wasn't a fan of the focus infinity lock, but something I am a fan of is the tab itself on the bottom. I find myself pinching it, which is quite nice, and I find myself being able to get quite accurate with it. And it's quite literally a screw or a bolt, and that's tactile. It's easy to use, and yeah, I like it. Another feature I like is the close focusing down to 0.4. Now obviously the rangefinder minimum distance is 0.7, but once you hit that distance, there is a slight tension that then allows you to go into the close focus. I kind of wish the infinity lock was similar to the close focus build. Instead of it locking at infinity, maybe it could just have a little bit more tension on it. I'm not sure if that's possible, I'm not an engineer, but yeah, the close focus and the way you access close focus is decent, I like it. Talking about image quality now, I think it's good, I mean really good. At f5.6 or f8, everything seems perfect in my eyes across the entire image. And then shooting at f1.4 or f2, the center of the image remains pin sharp while the edges naturally soften up. Also, I haven't seen any vignetting on this lens, which I think is great, considering the fact that when I use my 35mm summilux, which is obviously way more expensive, I do get some vignetting when shooting wide open. So yeah, the image quality on this lens does go above and beyond anything I expected. And I guess the last thing for me to say is a big thank you to Thypoch, obviously, for sponsoring this video, but also I'm happy to announce that this will be staying in my camera bag and getting a lot of use. I'll see you next week.